The Centre for Human Rights Research is located at the University of Manitoba's Fort Garry campus, which is on the ancestral and continued lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Innu, the Ansinnanu, the Oceti-Sakowin, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. All of us in these territories are governed by the promises and the relationships, much of them unfulfilled, of Treaty 1, the first of Canada's numbered treaties, and also of the Manitoba Act. We recognize that those of us in southern Manitoba have benefited from and continue to benefit from colonization, particularly of Treaty 1 lands, but also of the waters of Treaty 3 and the hydroelectric power, particularly of Treaty 5 territory, but also of Treaty 1, 2, 3, and 4. My name is Pauline Tennent. I am a settler, an immigrant, and a mum, and all of this impacts the work I do as a researcher and manager at the Centre for Human Rights Research at the University of Manitoba. Since 2012, the Centre for Human Rights Research at the University of Manitoba has been supporting interdisciplinary and collaborative projects to research and advocate for human rights and Indigenous sovereignties and resurgence. This podcast is called Just Research, and it brings into focus work that researchers, activists, and advocates, and people that are all three, have been doing for a more just world. We welcome you to Just Research. On this episode, we were lucky to hear from Dr. Laurie Wilkinson, a distinguished professor in sociology at the University of Manitoba and also a Canada Research Chair in Migration Futures. Dr. Wilkinson's scholarship covers a wide variety of topics related to migration, including anti-racism, sports, refugee resettlement, economic and health outcomes, and gender-based violence. In our conversation, we spoke with Dr. Wilkinson about what it means to do research with communities, how she maintains those relationships, how she found herself in academia, and what borders and human rights mean to her. So first, thank you for joining us, Dr. Wilkinson. It's a real pleasure, and I remember since I started, I feel like I've been at the U of M for so many years, but it was always your work that when we would Google things like refugees, migration, your work came up. And so just really grateful for you taking the time. So this first question, the big one, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure thing. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast. It's a great honor. And about myself. Well, I'm a professor in the Sociology and Criminology department here at the University of Manitoba, and I do some supervision of students not only in the Faculty of Arts, but in the Masters of Human Rights program, in the Peace and Conflict Studies program, people who are interested in migration issues. And I'm a researcher as well. I hold a Canada Research Chair in what's kind of weirdly named Migration Futures. I feel like that's too big for what I do, but we needed a catchy name. I'm just all around very interested in migration issues.
And so if you can share with us a little, how does where you come from impact the work you do? How did you come to the work?
That's a complicated question. So I grew up in a really low working class background. So my parents didn't have much money, but they always had the news on. Like every night at supper time, we watched the news before you go to bed. And I used to watch that. I didn't realize this till I was older, but how closely I watched the news and how I was always intrigued about why people wanted to hurt each other. And I would ask my mom and dad. They didn't really have a tool set to help me out. Then I'd ask my teachers, and they'd tell me not to worry about it because it was so far away. And I carried that kind of curiosity to university with me, because then after that, you see homeless people, you understand how poverty creates inequality, and why is it now it's the 21st century, but when I was a kid it was the 20th century. Why do we just turn a blind eye to our fellow human beings who are suffering? And that's kind of what brought me there. A few other things brought me there too, but that was kind of the overarching kind of feeling when I started university, is like, how do I learn about this, and how do I fix this, but how do I contribute to making life better in Canada?
Yeah, and it's interesting, that comment from your teacher, like it's so far away, and yet it's actually so close too, and these issues show up in different ways and these structures of oppression. How do you balance a work that is both at once so far away and also so close to home?
Well, you know what? Our earth is so small. Almost all of us can say that we have friends or connections around the world, right? We can email each other, we can talk to each other, we can fly to see each other, at least some of us can. You look at some of the big world problems like climate change, and we are one world. So in actuality, nothing's far away anymore. And I mean, being at the university, you're exposed more to people who are from outside of Canada too. See, they bring their experiences and their outlooks with them too, right? So it shrinks my world quite a bit. But I mean, ultimately, we're all related, right? We're all brothers and sisters. We're all human beings, and we all want the same thing, is to have a good, healthy life for us and our families. And so that's how I don't separate it. I just feel like I'm part of this big/small world.
Yeah. And did you do your studies at the University of Manitoba? Or?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I did my bachelor's and master's degree at the University of Saskatchewan. So yes, I'm a Rough Riders fan, and I'm still a Rough Riders fan. And then I did my PhD at the University of Alberta.
And what was your PhD in?
It was in sociology, and I looked at the resettlement experiences of a group of refugee youth who came to Alberta in the late 1990s.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Did you want to share a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it was a long time ago. The government of Canada was actually using Alberta as an experiment at that time. So they wanted to try to create conditions where refugees wouldn't just go to Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, because those are our three biggest cities. And like if you think about yourself and you had to leave Canada really fast, you would pick some place that you would know, right? And most of the time you would just know big cities. So Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver were the big cities. And so in the mid 1990s, you had the federal government experimenting with sending refugees to places where there was high employment vacancies, because the big issue with many refugees is to try to find work right away, because the faster they find work, the faster they settle, and the happier they are, all that stuff. So they sent half of them to Edmonton and Calgary, the big cities, and then the other half were sent to Grand Prairie, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Fort McMurray, and Red Deer. And we were charged with measuring their integration and their settlement experience, and I was charged with looking at how the kids did. So, well, not kids, they were youth, 15 to 24. And I was currently in that age category, so it was that long ago. And that became my dissertation, but it also became a really important report and knowledge base for not only the federal government, but the provincial governments and all the immigrant settlement agencies, to help them understand the process of resettling in smaller places, but also in bigger places.
Yeah, that's amazing. And has that work then, those themes that you uncovered, the sort of issues that were coming out, then has that continued in your work today?
It has, but when I first started here at the U of M, so I think the reason I got the job at the U of M was because I'm doing refugee work at a time where there wasn't a lot of academics doing work with refugees. There was some work, but there wasn't a lot, because there wasn't a lot of opportunity. And there wasn't a lot of funding. And so when I got the job here, I wanted to continue that research right away. But it took me 5 years to kind of get funding for the refugee side of my research. So I had to kind of diversify a little bit and look at integration of immigrants in general, just to get research funding, because there wasn't a lot of interest in refugees then. So I had to kind of weirdly put that stuff on hold while I was trying to establish my research career. And then as world conditions got worse and more conflicts started to happen, then there became more opportunities to do refugee research. And so that's when that side of my research really started to cook.
Yeah. So we have this question here, and I think it'll likely come out as well through some of the different conversations we have as we go on. But are there, significant people in your life, significant books that you read, scholars that influenced your work that you go back to?
So I'm going to tell you I'm a non-academic because the people actually that really shaped so I'll back that up. My supervisors for both of my graduate degrees, if I didn't have them taking me under their wing and teaching me what they knew, I wouldn't be here. But I draw my inspiration largely from the communities that I work with, because I work from a bottom-up approach. So I go to them with, hey, tell me what your problems are, and let's see if we can gather some data to, identify the nature of the problem and see if we can solve it. So for me, it's mainly been the community and building those bridges with the community, not bridges, building friendships with the community, so that they now feel comfortable enough to cold call me. And some of them still call me on the telephone, most of them will email me like, hey, we have this problem. Do you have data to help us to address this problem, or can we work on it together? And that's kind of my inspiration. I mean, I read books, I know about the theory and all of that stuff, and I can quote you all kinds of people, but honestly, it's the community that I work with that really energizes my work.
And I mean, in that sort of line of thinking, have there ever been projects that the community have wanted you to do, have asked you to do, but you can't take on for whatever reason, or that become too difficult, or
So I think there's two problems. One is you're too busy to start a project, and there's always that. Like I don't have a shortage of things that I need to do or could do. They're on the back burner. I've never been in a position, thankfully, where I've started a project and we couldn't finish it. Like we've always been able to finish it, but I do find myself more and more kind of, people will contact me and I'll be like, I just don't have room on my plate right now. Can maybe consider going to see this person. And that's partly how I got to where I am, because other people who came before me, they were too busy, and they're like, hey, we know this new prof. She's got lots of time on her plate. And so I ended up on some really good research projects actually early on in my career, because other professors couldn't take on that work. And I learned so much that way too. I think sometimes new professors get the wrong advice. And you got to start off these research projects on your own, and you got to be single authored papers, and it's all got to be on your own. But as a sociologist, you can't do this on your own. Like, it's too big, too much work, and you're not going to get research grants very early on if you're the only one who's applying on the team. You have to have a team, right? And teaming up with the big guys helps you get the cash at the start.
And in looking at some of your work, and there is many to choose from, but you do work with some of the same people, and how do you build on those relationships at the same time as building relationships in and with community?
Well, I think most of the people that I work with think the same way that I do, right? So don't have to, make them change their philosophy, because they already do that. And I think that makes a big difference, right, in terms of trying to get the research done and working through all of the things that need to be done. It surprises me when I agree to go onto a research team and I've never met any of the people before, and yet we all think in similar ways, and we can, like, I'm thinking about a project on racism in the universities that we launched. We got the money in April of 2020. Became a different project after that, but I'd never met had not met any of these people, and now they're really good friends. Like,
amazing.
Yeah, like, I don't know, I've never had I've been on projects where there's been clashes of identity and stuff like that, but I've never actually been involved in those. I don't know, I feel like the project and the problem is bigger than the ego. I don't know.
That's amazing. And did you want to share a little bit about that project?
Yeah, so we got a SHRC grant to look at anti-Asian racism and the flavor of it, because anti-Asian racism is different than Indigenous people and the experience that they have with racism, and Black Canadians and racism, right? So we're looking at Asian students and their experience about discrimination. The COVID comes along, which added this other interesting layer. Like even my own students from China, like they were the first to adopt the mask, and they were getting harassed at school and on the bus, and like so. We came at a time where we were just looking at like racism in general in the whole institution, and then it just became a layer of COVID-induced racism against particularly Chinese groups, but not exclusive to the Chinese students. We've got Montreal, Halifax, Toronto, Winnipeg, and Vancouver participating. So the big universities in those cities.
Yeah. And when do you sort of expect to be coming out with some of the findings?
Oh, we've already published some stuff.
Amazing.
Yeah, and we got a book that's coming out. Oh, I don't know when that book's coming. We have a book that's like about to come out, like within a couple of weeks, and then we've got another book that's coming out in. I think we have to have it all written by the end of January. So
amazing.
That'll probably be another year before the publication comes out.
So many things on
the go. And special issue of a couple of journals and stuff that have already published our work. So
that's amazing.
We're wrapping it up, actually. Yeah.
And what's next for that project then?
Well, so the principal investigator is unsure if he's able to continue. So I've been toying with the idea of nobody wants to step forward because we're all busy, but I'm like, somebody has to. So kind of thinking I'm going to volunteer, but to look at racism more broadly, because we know that it stretches beyond international students and beyond. And we, in our talks actually with my colleague at Dalhousie, Indigenous people's racism experiences at Dalhousie seem to be fairly similar, and the university response at Dalhousie seems to be very similar to ours. And so we the two of us really want to look at that, and how is it that racism against Indigenous people affects everybody else? Because if you're racist against Indigenous people, that affects everybody, right? And so it's a very clumsy way of saying that. Yeah, we're going to go ahead with something, but we're not sure what it looks like yet.
No, not at all. I mean, and I think sometimes that's where you have the idea and the curiosity you said, and the work needs to be done.
Totally needs to be done, because we did a review of their policies, each university's policies, and what the services we provide for international students, and the EDI policies and stuff, and it's very clear they're just scratching the surface. But I think COVID affected the progress of these policies.
In what ways?
Slowed everything down. Like, so institutionally everything slowed down. But then as we came back from the pandemic restrictions, we gave a lot of thought about what it was like for schooling for kids. Honestly, I think we just assume, they're all adults, they can come back and it's all good, and we didn't really make a big effort to do things to welcome people back. And so I still notice today students don't interact with one another at the start of class like they used to. They don't interact in class like they used to, and I think it has to do with the fact they spent 2 years behind a computer screen. And so when we're not interacting in these normal ways, how do we expect racism to get better, or sexism, or ableism, or whatever that we want to talk about, when we can't even interact appropriately with one another? So.
Those building blocks and the starting points. Sometimes I feel like the impacts of that time of COVID and the way it continues to structure people's lives is still to be seen. And I think because we thought, it's just adults, they know how to make friends, and making friends is a big deal. And I read a little bit on Reddit, on the U of M Reddit, and one of the biggest concerns is like, how do I find a friend here? Everybody's so unfriendly, and I'm so lonely, and I think that's a holdover. I'm not saying that there wasn't people that were like that before the pandemic, but I think there's a whole bunch more. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
So we haven't looked much at the questions here, but I did want to ask, the Center for Human Rights Research at the University of Manitoba focuses on a few different research themes, including one very related to your work, borders and human rights.
Yes.
What do borders and human rights mean to you?
The short, snappy answer is like borders are artificial, and they artificially maintain distance between us, right? Like, I mean, borders weren't borders so very long ago. And we know with migration, you can build a wall, you can pass all kinds of policies limiting the movement into your country, but you can't stop people from coming, right? And largely it's because we ignore the reasons that people leave. I think maybe gets back to this idea, right? The problem's far away and I don't have to worry about it. But our world is so small, and like Canada is so big. Maybe monetarily we can't afford to take more people, but like land wise we should be taking more people. Well, there's a whole reason why we should be taking more people, but the main reason is that people don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to move to Canada. And in fact, I was reading, I think it was an article in the BBC a couple of weeks ago, and they were all shocked that these people who wanted to retire couldn't retire in Canada because it was so hard to migrate here. And I'm like, well, duh. And so they ended up going to some place that was easier to retire. But even the easier place, that the whole article talked about all the challenges that they experienced. I'm like, yeah, because every country has set up these artificial regulations and borders to prevent people from coming in without thinking about the reasons why people need to come. I mean, the retirees is maybe a different example, but people have to move because, well, their country might not exist in 5 years because it'll be underwater. Or they're crossing the Darien Gap by walking because they're starving. I think the discourse on migration is so whack. We talk about people like they're numbers and you can move them around and that they're stupid. And they're just doing this on a fling. When in fact, actually, like the people who are crossing the Darien Gap, they're farmers whose farms have either been confiscated, they're in the middle of a drought, and their families are starving. They're not crossing the Darien Gap because they think that the United States is some sort of Disneyland. It's not just the media that talks about migrants in terms of millions and numbers and people you move around. It's our politicians too. They dehumanize migrants.
And it feels like there's so many euphemisms used. This flood and this
waves and droves and
and it just in challenging those discourses, and they're pretty dominant. How do you think we can best challenge those?
Well,
what would you want to say to challenge it?
So that you're not going to like this answer because it's difficult, right? You can't I think human beings want like a simple, like if I just give you this cocktail, all of a sudden you'll be thinking more, in the lines of human rights. You have to reach at it in so many different places, right? Like you have to talk to governments and politicians over and over again before one of them wakes up one morning and has a brilliant idea about something, and it's because they've heard it over and over again. You have to reach out to media and be strong or brave enough to say, you're asking the wrong question. So I'm old, I'm decrepit, I've had a lot of interviews, and when they start asking me the wrong question, I'm like, no, you're asking the wrong questions here. 9 times out of 10, however, they don't understand that they're asking the wrong questions. And I get it, right? They got to sell newspapers and clicks and all that kind of stuff. But then we got to educate the people. And I feel like that's our best chance because politicians will listen to their constituents and media will listen to their clientele or the people who buy into it, right? And so if they're educated about it, and then, this is a long game here, right? We're talking years and years, and you're talking multiple people giving the same message over and over again, but eventually those institutions will change. I guess that's why I never want to shirk the responsibility I have as a professor in the classroom, because I feel like teaching people, giving them factual information, not giving them opinions, but factual information to make these decisions and to be able to make these conversations and debates at their level, because who knows, maybe one day I'm teaching like the next Prime Minister of Canada. I want them to be, exactly. I want them to be equipped to talk about racism, right? I want them to be equipped to talk about world migration issues.
What would some of those, when you were mentioning, like, you're asking the wrong questions, what would some of the right questions be? What do you wish you could be
Well,
asked?
I think, in terms of media, but even government too, they like to hear about numbers. And I'm a statistician. I know how to deal with the numbers. I know how to make fancy charts, and I know how to talk about that. But you need to talk about the people behind the numbers. So I like to always do my research, if I can, in a mixed methodology way. So bringing in some interviews, so that you can bring those numbers alive. So I remember this Yazidi refugee project that I was contracted to do with the federal government. And they told me, they give me this money and they're like, you're going to do a survey with Yazidi refugees. And I said to them, no, I'm not. Well, first of all, I had to figure out who a Yazidi was, because I actually didn't know. They went back, and one of the things I learned is that the Yazidis were prevented from going to school in their homeland. So Iran, Iraq, Turkey, in that area, they couldn't go to school. So most of them had barely grade 2. So they're functionally illiterate in their own language, because schooling was not in their own language, but they were also functionally illiterate in the language of the country that they were raised in, because they were prevented from going further in school. So how do you give a survey to a group of people that has, very limited ability? Because I can give you a survey in the language that you want. That's part of the community that I've built around me, is I can know who to contact when I need translations and stuff. But that's going to be a foreign way of collecting the data. So I said to the federal government, no, I'm going to do interviews, because this group of people is not literate. And they're like, well, we still want you to do surveys. I'm like, no, trust me. Thank God they trust me. And I feel like that's the project, out of all the projects I've done for the federal government, that's the project they like the best. But it's also the project where I talk about the interview results and I make seasoned people cry, because the stories that the Yazidi women were telling are, well, even the men, terrible. But until you hear the story, you just see them as a group of people, or at least the governments tend to see them as a group of people. We can move them around, we resettle them in London or Winnipeg, and everything will be okay because the numbers are all okay. And it's not till you hear the stories of the people and the stories that they're bringing with them that you come to understand it's amazing they're okay given what they've been through. But it also gives them humanity. They're not people that you move around and, with the Yazidi community, you are excommunicated if you marry or enter a relationship with somebody who's not Yazidi. And their community is really small, and now we've spread them out across Canada, across Germany, across the world. That community is going to die under this type of migration strategy. And so what can governments do to preserve their culture, their language, their way of life? And this is not such a foreign or one-off case. Think about all of the Pacific Island nations that are about to be flooded. You can't just move everybody, Switzerland will take some, and Sweden will take some, Canada will take some. You can't do that, because that culture and language is going to die. So you have to have countries stepping up, not only to say we'll take everybody, but we'll take everybody and we'll settle them in the same place, which is a tall order for the receiving country. But unless countries step forward, we're going to lose cultures and languages at a rate that, we haven't seen before.
Yeah. As you're chatting about this and you're sharing like some of the work that you've done in the past, all the way back to your PhD and those first projects, what do you see as like a successful resettlement? Like, what does that look like?
Well, we haven't figured this out from a statistical standpoint. And even from an academic standpoint, the definition of integration or successful integration, nobody has that. Yeah. But I also think from an individual standpoint, it's so different from individual to individual. So for some people, success might be, I have a job that recognizes the education and the training that I have, and that I can put food on the table, I can buy a house. That might be success for one person, whereas another person might be, I can get up in the morning, I am healthy because my illnesses have been treated, my kids can go to school, my neighbors, I've got friends. And so that's, I think, part of the reason why integration is so hard to define, because there is an individual component to it. the monetary economic component, that's easy to measure, but that doesn't necessarily make you integrated.
Yeah. And when you shared about, you know, like living with dignity and, you know, like the idea that we could be losing many cultures, languages, and how that intersects with integration and how we, as myself as a settler Canadian, as an immigrant, what do we need to know? What do we need to know in challenging these discourses?
So I want to bring this a bit closer to home, because this is happening on Canadian soil, right? There's Indigenous peoples that have been displaced in Canada and are continually displaced, right? Like, we can talk about band councils and cultural groups that have to move because of flooding, I was talking about the Davis Inlet Inuit people who they've been moved 3 times. Many of their kids got addicted to inhaling gas fumes, and the suicide rate was 78 times higher than it was. Like, this is happening in our backyard, and they're not called refugees. And, you know, I know that there's some elements of government that care very much, but many Canadians don't know this is happening in their own backyard. And some Canadians don't care, right? They blame Indigenous peoples when in fact actually it was the structure and the government that did this, right? And so we have this problem in our backyard too that we need to consider. And the United Nations, they tap us on the wrist every 5 years. Bad Canada, you're not treating your Indigenous peoples very well. But I feel like there's too many people in the community that just collectively shrug their shoulders and like they don't think it applies to them, and yet they're our next door neighbors. They are. I mean, we're all related. Like, I feel we're all brothers and sisters, and sitting back and not doing anything to rectify the situation is heartbreaking to me.
And with that heartbreak and with like the heavy work that you do, how do you keep going?
I am lucky. Like, I'm a white settler Canadian. I have a fairly solid job with a great income. I live in a city. I have a house. But I can take the hat off and stop thinking about it because I'm white. I'm privileged. I'm all of these things. So to me, it's not a question I dwell upon, other than I recognize this privilege, and that I can take a brain vacation, and that the people that I work with and many of the students I work with, they can't take that brain vacation. And it's not like I walk around with guilt, but I always remember that I have it so good, even though I have lots of stress. So to me, it's not a question I ponder so much. And it doesn't bring me down. It just, actually, I just want to use my privilege to try to make the world a better place. When I die, can I say to myself, is it a little bit better because I was here, because I did something, or I tried to do something? Like, and that's what I try to tell my students too. I don't know.
Yeah.
How's that for wishy-washy?
Not at all. I mean, and you've chatted a little, you've mentioned your students now multiple times. What are some of the experiences you have there? What are some of the things that keep you going in your work with students?
My students keep my work going. Well, I mean, to be honest, I couldn't do half of what I do if I didn't have students. Like, and the students that I work with, I'm a little bit biased. I feel like they're the best. Not in terms of academic ability. Like, they're all smart, but they are so dedicated to the cause. Like, they want to make life better. They want to make Canada better. Or they want some aspect, right? They're trying to fight for social justice and human rights too. And their spark and their energy really motivates me. And I'm constantly amazed. Even the international students, they're only here for a couple of months and they're already like doing volunteer work for a Main Street project, or collecting money for some sort of program. And I marvel, because they do make me the professor that I am. And I, in return, want to make sure that they're successful, and I try really hard with them. But yeah, my students are everything.
That's amazing.
I am so lucky.
That's amazing. Backing it up a little as well, what do human rights mean to you?
Human rights means, like, when I think about the term human rights, I think about I think about big things. I think about the Magna Carta, the Charter of Human Rights, the fact that, supposedly by being human, we were supposedly born equal, yet, that's not the case, right? We never treat one another as equivalent beings. And I marvel at the fact that we have all these laws, these regulations, but on an international level, they have no teeth, right? Like, even Canada, when we go against these regulations, we just get a tap on the wrist, right? There's no real impetus for any governments or peoples to enforce anything with regards to human rights. And I think this is why we have continued conflicts today, because the world collectively shrugs its shoulders. And so to me, I'm glad that we have this structure of rights, and that in Canada, that structure most of the time saves us. But I'm sad that most countries don't have that, and that as citizens of the globe, we have no power to enforce, to make countries make change, to force their countries to treat people with dignity, or make sure at least that they're getting fed. Makes me depressed.
Yeah. And the level of accountability is
yeah. I sometimes tell my students, it'd be my dream to educate us out of this problem, but I don't say that anymore, because I feel like it's not going to happen. But the young minds that are coming to my classes, they're smarter than me, so I'm hoping that they can carry the message forward too.
Yeah. And with all of the challenges with human rights instruments and conventions and declarations and that sort of dog with no teeth, is there a different language you use? Is there a different approach or framework that you rely on?
As I've aged and as I've become more knowledgeable, because every day, this is a great job, you learn something new every day. My tactic has changed. So, my tactic used to be, let's blind them with numbers and data, and the reason that we're doing this is bad, and here's all the data, and here's our pathway to doing something right. I've learned that message doesn't resonate with some people. I've sadly learned that the message of money resonates. So people like to talk, oh yeah, we care about human rights, we care about people, blah, 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 let me hear your stories. But then as soon as I start talking about how much it costs, and I talk about it in terms of costs of not doing something. So if we take care of something today, economically it costs us less money to fix the problem, which we're probably going to have to deal with anyways. The Winnipeg's talking about pulling out all the train tracks that go through the middle of the city, and they did that study in the early 1990s, and it was millions, I think $500 million to move the train tracks back in the 1990s. Now they're talking about $1 billion. But we can talk about, if the human rights argument doesn't resonate with you, it sure resonates with all of your politicians. It doesn't matter what stripe they are. That if you don't, if you invest a little bit in integration at the start, you get way more in economic return, or it costs you way less than it does to let if you don't invest, and then they get have run into problems, and or you talk about how much money even refugees bring into our economy, or how much labor they bring, and that if we stop bringing people, our economy is going to shrink. And like it or not, we live in a capitalist economy, and capitalism only works when the clientele is growing. The tax base has to grow too, right? I think on average, a refugee pays more in taxes over their lifetime than they ever cost in terms of integration. And our tax base is shrinking. And we're all aging. Like, so there's a demographic factor here too. And I feel like I hate making these arguments to politicians, but those are the ones they listen to.
Yeah. I mean, that issue of cost, that issue of like numbers and statistics, you shared that mixed methods is sort of your way to go.
Yeah.
And how did you come to that? Like, was that always your approach?
No. So when I first started, as a professor, I remember one of my first talks, it was for a room full of policymakers, and I was so proud of myself. I got up there and I had a multiple regression up there, and I thought that I didn't need to explain what it was or how I was, and I thought actually that the results I had were self-explanatory. And one of the first questions I got, I nearly fell off the podium. Because the question was, well, what do we do with all of these numbers? Like, what do these numbers mean? And I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, y'all went to university. Like, didn't you learn how to deal? You're the policymakers. But, I had to think of something on the fly because I didn't realize at that time. You don't learn that stuff at university very well. So I try to impart upon my students that, you need to explain, like, what these numbers mean and what you could do with them. And then as I got more comfortable in my role as an academic, I became more comfortable providing alternative methodologies when opportunities would come my way, because the questions that they would ask would be more amenable to interview data rather than statistical data. It's still a hard sell. Like, when you're trying to make policy, you do want to have numbers rather than interviews, but I think you need to have interview experiential data in order to understand how this policy is going to affect or influence that person.
Yeah.
So it's a hard sell, but you just got to keep pushing it.
Yeah. And it's so interesting you say, like, so my area would more be qualitative research.
Yeah.
But I obviously have my own biases because I'm like, you work with community and that you're doing all this, like, quantitative and statistical work.
But they need that.
Yeah.
Like, because they're funded by the government, and the government won't listen to them unless you give numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you do that well? Like, how do you bring those numbers and the needs of community, the wants?
Well, I mean, from a scientific perspective, right? If you look at the research question always tells you what kind of data you need. So research question directs that. But then you have the hard work of collecting the data and packaging it in a way that everybody can understand. So also not an academic, because I don't think I could write using jargon, because it's just not the way my brain's working. So I try to write in a way that I think my pretend audience is my mom and my grandma. Can my mom and my grandma, who never went to university, do they understand why this is a problem, why we need to solve it, and how we're going to solve it? That's the imaginary audience that I'm writing for, and that seems to have helped me in the past and in the present.
Yeah. I mean, and having that audience in mind speaks so highly to your work in the way that you are trying to impact, policy and the public and students and
but it's something that I learned actually from my master's supervisor. He's a great Canadian sociologist named Peter Lee, and he told me that sociology is a science of the people for the people. And I hold that pretty close to my heart. So, like, if my mom and my grandma, who are both reading my stuff from heaven now, but if they can't understand it, then I'm doing something wrong. It's not wrong. I'm not speaking to the audience that's listening to me. Like, I don't have like the big brainy theoretical academics are not reading my work because it's not what will help them, right? Yeah. But my audience is more like, what can we take away from this research, and how can we apply it to a potential problem?
So if you could share with me a little about some of the projects that your time has been spent on now.
Well, where do I begin? I'm just finishing off a project looking at the initial integration experiences of Afghan refugees. So the fall of Kabul happened in August of 2021, right in the middle of the pandemic, right? And I think many people who are listening to this podcast remember how absolutely tragic and chaotic that time was. But it was kind of chaotic when they were coming to Canada. So, like, to get out of Afghanistan was very complicated. But then arriving in Canada was so complicated because this group of people, like people who come to Canada, they're pre-screened medically and criminally. They have visas and IDs and stuff like that. The Afghans that were coming at that time had none of that. And under international law, they can't even get out at the airport. So IRCC was processing them on the tarmac so first it was just Toronto Pearson, and then the second airport that came online was Calgary. Processing them on the tarmac they'd be coming on these big military planes too, right, with no seats, and I can't imagine how. No. So I actually was part of the federal government's kind of a working group, and I got to watch them talk every 2 weeks about what are the problems of processing people on the tarmac, and then of course, like, as winter was coming, how the heck do we get around international law, because they still couldn't bring them into Pearson or the Calgary airport. So they had to set up these little like Kwanzas just to give them some protection. But then after that, because we couldn't congregate with one another, they couldn't receive settlement services, and they had to stay in quarantine hotels. And then we had to find housing for them, and some of them, some families, like big families, would be in 1 or 2 hotel rooms for 2 or 3 or 4 months at a time before we could find them temporary, or not temporary, but accommodation. And so I was tasked with interviewing Afghans about this experience and what they were gonna do. And so I'm just about finished the report. But the thing that has tied me up with that report is they wanted me to come up with a checklist, because sadly this is not going to be the last time that we're going to have to like immediately fly people out. And it's hard for me as an academic to make a checklist. Like, I feel like I can't make a checklist for settlement agencies. Like, first you have to do this, and first, but there are other things that I can tell them. So in my previous research, we found that people who spent the longest time in the hotels had the hardest time integrating, because that their time in limbo is longer. So their kids can't enroll in school, they can't go to language courses, because it's all tied to where you're going to be living. And then living in can you imagine living in a hotel room with your family for
I really can't.
And also in a foreign country, during a pandemic, right? Like so my earlier research said that we needed to like shrink that period of time. And if we had to put them in a hotel, putting them in a hotel with a kitchenette in it, huge.
Massive.
Yeah, because it gives them agency.
Yeah.
And especially for refugees that have spent time in a refugee camp, they haven't been able to do much for their families, and the agency of being able to cook is such a comforting thing
and
for the family.
Yeah,
and you feel like you're doing something too.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I'm also working on a project with the United Nations. We're trying to do an education campaign on Twitter and Facebook. So this is like a foreign thing for me. Like, I have an Instagram account, but that's it, and I don't really interact with it. So I'm collecting little nuggets of information, and then they're magically turning it into like a Instagram post to try to educate people about, what we need to know about refugees. I am doing work on the anti-Asian racism and universities project. I don't want to tell you all the things. I'll just tell you about the anti-racism in sport project that I'm doing with Sarah Tietzel and Leisha Strachan from kinesiology and rec studies. So they're the masters of this, because they're in the sports world. Yeah. That's not a world that, last time I played sports, I catastrophically broke my leg. So my sporting career was short and painfully ended. But they were tasked to look at racism and underrepresentation of girls and why girls are pushed out of sport. And so we had a project during COVID, which was finished, and now we've got other funding to look at, like, why are immigrants, why are women pushed out of sport? And it's really interesting from my perspective anyways, that but they're mostly in the driver's seat on that one.
Well, I look forward to seeing more that's to come. And when you shared that, that project with the United Nations, where you're sort of finding those little nuggets of what people need to know about what it means to be a refugee, What are those nuggets for you? Do you have any you'd like to share?
Well, I mean, like one of the talking points that always gets a lot of attention is that for every refugee that comes into Canada, 1.9 new jobs are created. And that's not including the job that the refugee does. And so, because often the discourse around refugees is, oh, they're coming in the country and they're taking our jobs. Or they're coming in our country and they're taking our houses. Newsflash, housing crisis has been going on for decades. But newcomers, refugees, international students, they're easy fodder, right? They're easy to blame because they can't vote. I always try to remind my politician friends, the naturalization rate is 83%, so they're all future voters. So blame them at your peril. Yeah. But I feel like that's like a short, sweet selling. It doesn't get at the human rights issue. Like we could talk about there's 115 million people that need some sort of assistance or resettlement. But again, it's like 115 million people that are far away, and I'm never going to meet them. And how much is it going to cost Canada? I feel like that's not a good selling feature. But like trying to encourage Canadians to understand that actually not only we have a human rights commitment to look after refugees. Like Canada signed on to the United Nations UNHCR. They've signed on to this agreement, right? So we have a duty to do this, but we have a duty to look after people because they're our brothers and sisters. And they don't cost us money. In fact, they actually bring us money in the end. Yeah. So to me, it's a win-win situation. And I don't know. I know why politicians try to blame foreigners because it's just easy. It's lazy. It's xenophobic. Yeah. It gets nothing brings people to the polls faster than fear, right? Yeah. So.
And we seem to be seeing that more and more. And also, I mean, I'm always reminded that like Canada actually doesn't take a huge number of refugees. Is that still the case? Well,
so during the Trump so I'll back up.
Yeah.
In the United States is like the place where the largest group of refugees are resettled. However, out of the number of people who need to be resettled, only 1.5% ever get to a place where they could be resettled. But the Americans used to take them on the most. Under the Trump administration, they went from being the largest receiver of refugees to falling under the number that Canada took on. And so we became number one under the Trump administration. But like we were talking about like 70,000 refugees a year. Like this is a drop in a bucket, right? I feel like Canada could and should do more. I feel like our politicians could do a better job of selling that. I feel like they need to try to convince Canadians that, actually refugees are not a threat to our culture. They're not a threat to our jobs. And actually it's an economic benefit to bring them in because they're going to be paying more in taxes than they ever take out at the start.
Your work touches on a variety of topics. So just looking at some of your reports and your writing, migration, healthcare, racism, mental health, labor. From your perspective, what ties everything together?
Inequality. Like if you don't have equal access to healthcare, you don't have equal access to income and food, then a whole bunch of bad things happen to you. And if you look at the migration issue, a lot of that has to do with inequality. You're not leaving your country if you feel secure in your job and your kids can walk to school without getting shot and like all of that stuff, right? So inequality seeps into everybody's lives, and it's one of the push factors that generates migration.
Yeah. What's the relationship for you between research, between teaching, resistance?
I think they're all tied together, right? Like, I mean, as a professor, I want to encourage my students to get excited to do research about a problem that gets them angry. I feel like anger is a great motivator for me, and it seems to be a great motivator for my students. So here I'm walking into my classroom and one of the things I'm trying to do is get you angry.
Mm.
Sometimes with me, but that's okay. Because they're going to carry this on. Like, I'm not going to be on this planet for a long time, right? Like, I can't be so egotistical that to think to myself, I'm going to make all these changes. But if I can go in front of a classroom and motivate or aggravate a bunch of people to do that work, that's how change happens, right? So I think it's all tied together, and it's all tied together in my mind as a way of making our world a better place. I couldn't have articulated that to you, though, as a student. Yeah. But I also, as a student, I never imagined I'd be a prof. So
You didn't?
No.
What did you imagine yourself doing?
I actually, when I was shortlisted for the interview here, I'd already been shortlisted for a job with Health Canada and Statistics Canada. So I was going to move to Ottawa. I was going to have a 9-to-5 job, and I was going to crunch numbers, and yeah.
Do you have a 9-to-5 job here?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And do you ever, like, not wish you had taken that, but do you think, like, do you ever think about that, about what life would look like?
What I think about is how I was so sure that I didn't want to be a prof that I just never imagined being a prof. And then, because even when I took this job, I know it sounds so dumb. When I took this job, I just thought, I'll try it out for a couple of years and I won't get any research grants, and then they'll fire me, and I'll just go and plan B is go work for the federal government. So I just never take for granted. Many of my friends that I went to grad school with really, really, really wanted to be profs, and none of them became profs, and I feel bad for them because they were they were way more brilliant than I could ever be. And so I feel bad that they haven't had this chance, because it's stressful, don't get me wrong, but man, it's a job I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd do and enjoy.
That's so amazing to hear. It's so brilliant.
Maybe it's just I walk through life with thinking I'm going to fail, and so then it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, serendipity too.
Totally. Like, totally. That's, I am here because of luck.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I mean, thinking of that too, and people who are thinking about going into academia and people who aren't, like, what advice would you give, students, graduate students?
Keep your options open. Like, I feel like my friends who just wanted to be a prof were really not happy. Maybe they're happy now. But yeah, keep your options open and don't be afraid to take, like, that fork in the road. And, sometimes that fork in the road is going to take you to new places. And listen. So I've been talking a lot. And I talk a lot. Totally. But I was a very quiet student because I was listening. And even when I was first starting here, I'm listening. And I try to remind myself to shut up and listen, because people know way more about the everyday functioning of the people that I study than I do, because I'm still caught in the ivory tower, right? But yeah, those are 2 pieces of advice I'd give to future students.
Yeah, thank you for that. Where do you see your work going in the future?
In fact, I thought about this question. I can't, because when I started out, I never thought that my work would go so far into health research.
Interesting.
But that's just the fork in the road, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's not just the COVID research, which I forgot to mention, but I'm still working on the COVID project. Yeah, there's one I forgot. But when I was taking health classes, I just was taking them to fill up my schedule. I wasn't super interested in health, but yet it touches on everything that I do. And so that's a long-winded way of saying you don't know where your research is going to go. Like, and I think you should be willing to, like, follow your nose. And this is a job where you can follow your nose. And when you're a student, you can follow your nose. And it's hard, right, when you're a student, because you're thinking, am I following the right direction with my nose? And you have to rely a bit on your professor. But my experience has been that if you have the scent of a good research project on your nose, you're probably on the right the right step anyways, right?
Yeah.
And you almost got to let go of that, because there's many questions we can answer in research.
Yeah.
But you got to put those aside for another day.
Yeah.
So for me, I never know what's going to happen in 6 months. So.
Yeah.
Questions of borders and migration are often presented to us as big and complex issues, but Dr. Wilkinson's work shows us how personal and close to home these issues truly are. Doing research with these communities brings the stories of each of the individuals into focus, crossing borders in search of safety, stability, and most of all, a sense of home. This podcast was produced by CHRR's Knowledge Mobilization Coordinator, Angela Cicerone, and similar to other initiatives at the CHRR, benefited tremendously from the guidance of Dr. Adele Perry. We would also like to thank Michael Elves and the UMFM team for their support and guidance for this podcast.